Welcome back to this week's episode of The Emily Show. It is an on-the-road show, which hopefully if you're on audio, you can't tell, and if you're on video, you definitely can. But interestingly enough, I happened to be in New York for other events and made my way to the Southern District of New York to sit in court during the presentment, which you might know as an arraignment, for Sean Puffy P. Diddy Combs, and the extended detention hearing that was argued today, September 17th, 2024. This is after news of his arrest on September 16th absolutely caught me by surprise. We knew that this was coming, but it was always a question of when. And after the raids in March, we went on throughout the summer without an indictment, and we might have some more clues as to why based on things shared by the U.S. attorney in this case. The lead U.S. attorney arguing today was Emily Johnson. So today I'm going to break down for you the indictment, the press conference by the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, the press conference given after the detention hearing by the defense attorney, my takeaways from the detention hearing that lasted over 2 hours in court today, and the documents filed in support of detention by the prosecution, arguing against detention by the defense, and of course, the charges in the indictment. I am not going to go into the details of the indictment more than what has gone into from the press conference from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. They go into it in enough detail. I've gone over the Cassie lawsuit that was filed in November of 2023 and then settled. That lawsuit comes up heavily in this detention hearing and seems to be the basis for a lot of the racketeering charges in this indictment. So those are things that are familiar already that I have covered, and we are not going to get into all of it. I will link the Department of Justice's press release for this case that includes the full indictment on the show notes and description of this video if you want to read the entire document for yourself, but I'm not going to cover the whole thing. I will talk about the charges briefly, potential maximum sentences. That all comes into play in the detention hearing. And at the end of the day, Sean Puffy Combs is being held in custody until trial, but his attorneys have another hearing on that tomorrow afternoon. I don't think it's going to go any differently for them, but they are going to give it one more go. So let's get in. That was the longest intro ever. Well, yes, plans got changed and, you know, court pops off when I travel, but normally not where I'm at. So when court pops off while you travel, where you're at, you go to court. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to The Emily Show. I'm Emily D. Baker, the internet's go-to legal analyst and big fan of the cursey words. I've been a licensed attorney for over 17 years. I'm a former prosecutor, and I break down the legal side of pop culture and entertainment stories we can't stop talking about. We should just get into it. Let's go. A huge thank you to today's sponsor, Green Chef. Not only does Green Chef provide you with easy to prepare meals with organic ingredients right to your door, but you can also make your morning routine easier because once we're back to school, that's what's always hard for me is making sure that we all get out the door on time. But Green Chef can also deliver grab and go breakfast items, easy to prep lunch items, and healthy snacks to make sure that you're handled all day long. And you're not going to get bored with Green Chef. They have over 80 amazing recipes every week, and their recipes are seasonal, so they are picking what is freshest at a particular time of year. Not only do they have tons of recipes, but this month they're offering you tons of classes as well. Because with ClassPass, you have access to thousands of top-rated gyms and fitness studios around the world. And for a limited time, new Green Chef subscribers will receive 50 free ClassPass credits so you can try it for yourself. It's about a month's worth of membership, so you can really see if it fits your life. So if you're ready to find out for yourself why Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well, go to greenchef.com/EmilyBakerClass for 50% off your first box plus 50 free credits with ClassPass. That's code EmilyBakerClass at greenchef.com/EmilyBakerClass. Get 50% off your first box plus 50 free ClassPass credits. So find out for yourself why Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well. Let's get back to today's episode. And a huge thank you to our sponsors, not only for making shows like this available, but for a lot of the topics we cover that I don't monetize in other ways. Our sponsors ride with the law nerds, and I appreciate it. Let's get into first the press conference from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, then what the defense said after Diddy's detention hearing, where he was detained pending trial and bail was denied, and then we will get into the rest of the documents, because what the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York breaks down is helpful in giving context. But yes, this lies heavily in the same allegations that we saw in Cassie's lawsuit. So if you're familiar with that lawsuit, some of these things will sound familiar to you. So let's go to the Southern District of New York's press conference from this morning.
Morning, everyone. My name is Damian Williams, and I'm the U.S. Attorney here in the Southern District of New York. Today, I'm announcing the unsealing of a 3-count indictment, charging Sean Combs with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, interstate transportation for prostitution. The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct.
Part of what needs to be noted is he noted incidents from 2008 forward. Using RICO allows you to bring in those predicate acts, that chain of events. So even though those individual crimes aren't charged, you can reach all the way back to 2008 to bring in a pattern of behavior that is continuous and ongoing. So you can bring in a lot more information under racketeering, as we've seen in the R. Kelly case, as they're trying to do in Georgia with the YSL case, and as we've seen in other high-profile cases.
As alleged in the indictment, to carry out this conduct, Sean Combs led and participated in a racketeering conspiracy that used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity, including sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and the obstruction of justice.
A lot of those things are detailed in the indictment and are similar to the way they're described in Cassie's lawsuit. So I have to wonder if the arson is the car we heard about that was exploded that Cassie talked about in her lawsuit. And for those of you listening, I did speed him up to 1.25 because it is a long-ish press conference, but also he speaks in a very considered pace, and I think at 1.25 it'll be just fine.
Let me say a little bit more about the charges. The indictment alleges that Combs abused and exploited women and other people for years, and in a variety of ways. As alleged, Combs used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sexual performances with male commercial sex workers, some of whom he transported or caused to be transported over state lines.
And that's where that third charge
Combs
comes
allegedly
from.
planned and controlled the sex performances, which he called freak-offs.
We heard
And he
about this
often
in
electronically
Cassie's
reported
lawsuit
them.
too.
The freak-offs sometimes lasted days at a time, involved.
The electronically recorded them is also going to be a big factor of this, because we talked about how much digital evidence the feds would have taken out of Combs's homes when they searched them in March, including his security systems, including his computers, including cloud accounts. And today at the detention hearing, the U.S. attorneys said that there were over 90 cell phones, computer, and cloud accounts taken in these search warrants. So there is quite a substantial amount of digital evidence, but those things can also be used as blackmail against victims, because if there's recordings of the things that they are doing and have done at Combs's direction, then it makes it very hard to speak out against him if there's a threat that those videos will ever see the light of day.
Multiple commercial sex workers, and often involved a variety of narcotics, such as ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB, which Combs distributed to the victims to keep them obedient and compliant. As alleged, when Combs didn't get his way, he was violent, and he subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse so that they would participate in the freak-offs, and that Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair. On one occasion in March of 2016, that conduct was captured on video and later reported in the media.
And that goes to the
Specifically,
Intercontinental
Combs
Hotel
kicked,
video.
dragged, and threw a vase at a victim in a Los Angeles hotel when the victim was attempting to flee. As alleged, these assaults often resulted in injuries to the victims, which took days or weeks to heal. In addition to the violence, the indictment alleges that Combs threatened and coerced victims to get them to participate in the freak-offs. He used the embarrassing and sensitive recordings he made of the freak-offs as collateral against the victims. And the indictment alleges that he maintained control over the victims in several ways, including by giving them drugs, by giving and threatening to take away financial support or housing, by promising them career opportunities, by monitoring their whereabouts, and even by dictating their physical appearance.
And that's where the fraud and coercion
Because of all of this,
comes
the
in.
indictment alleges that the victims did not believe they could refuse Combs without risking their security or facing more abuse. The indictment also alleges other acts of violence undertaken by Combs and others, including violence against witnesses to his abuse, kidnapping, and arson. The indictment alleges that on more than one occasion, Combs carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten victims and witnesses.
And there were firearms recovered in the search
Now,
warrants.
Combs did not do this all on his own. As I mentioned, Combs has been charged with RICO conspiracy. He used his business and employees of that business and other close associates to get his way. Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in the business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff. The indictment alleges that those individuals facilitated the freak-offs. They booked the hotel rooms and stocked them with the supplies, including drugs, baby oil, personal lubricant, extra linens, and lighting.
One of the things that needs to be noted about RICO is even when others are taking the action, if it's in furtherance of what they are alleging as the organization and the crimes, then it can be used against Sean Combs. Normally, the actions of someone else can't be used against the defendant in court, but in conspiracy and in RICO cases, you can use the actions of a third person or third parties if it's all part of the same organization against Sean Combs. So even though others were booking the hotel rooms, that can still be used to show part of the ongoing conspiracy. Could other individuals be charged here? Yes. However, I have to wonder if some of those third-party individuals are already talking to the government about what they can share so that they won't be charged. Because if we know anything about the feds, is that they love talking to somebody who could be charged but agrees to testify instead, especially when they are going after the bigger fish. And Diddy is the one in this case.
When the hotel rooms got damaged, they helped clean it up. They arranged for victims and commercial sex workers to travel for the freak-offs, and they delivered large quantities of cash to Combs to pay for the commercial sex workers. The indictment also alleges that they helped Combs cover up his crimes. During the March 2016 incident at the LA hotel that I mentioned earlier, a member of the hotel security staff intervened, and Combs attempted to bribe the staff member with a stack of cash to make sure that what happened was kept quiet.
This came up in the detention
And as the
hearing
indictment
well.
alleges, in late 2023, after public allegations were made about Combs' crimes,
That was
he
Cassie's
and others
lawsuit.
pressured witnesses and victims to stay silent, including by making phone calls to witnesses and victims and giving them a false narrative of what they had experienced. And as alleged, Combs used others to help conceal his abuse by monitoring and preventing victims from leaving a location in order to hide their injuries, or by locating and contacting a victim who had attempted to flee.
They talk about this a bit in the detention hearing as well, but they talk about victims of Combs that had been injured and that were forced to stay in hotels and elsewhere for periods of time until they healed so no one would see their injuries. That was discussed in connection with the video from the Intercontinental that not only Sean Combs, but others as part of his businesses would help keep victims where they were healing and recovering so that they wouldn't be seen, so it wouldn't come back to him.
As part of this investigation, in March of this year, special agents from HSI executed search warrants at Combs' residences in Miami and Los Angeles. They
And we
also
said then
executed a
the
warrant for
indictments were
Combs'
coming.
electronic devices. During those searches, agents seized evidence of the crimes charged in this indictment. They seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 defaced AR-15s and a large capacity drum magazine.
And when he talks about the ARs being defaced, it was their identification and the numbers on them that were bored off of the weapons so that they were much more difficult, if not impossible, to trace.
They also seized evidence of the freak-offs, electronic
Videos.
devices that contain images and videos of the freak-offs with multiple victims. And they seized cases and cases of the kinds of personal lubricant and baby oil that Combs' staff allegedly used to stock hotel rooms for the
Not
freak-offs.
what I was
More than
expecting in this
1,000
case.
bottles altogether.
More than 1,000 bottles.
Here are some of the items that we recovered during the searches.
There's pictures.
As you can see here, this is a drum magazine, large capacity, and it contains, I believe, 59 rounds. I mentioned as well we recovered
That was
three
recovered
AR-15s.
from Los Angeles.
This is a close-up shot of one of the AR-15s, and you can see right here the serial number has been thoroughly defaced. Another picture of more ammunition and parts of two AR-15s right there. Now, I want to be clear about two things. First, this office is determined to investigate and prosecute anyone who engages in sex trafficking, no matter how powerful or wealthy or famous you may be. No one should doubt our commitment on that. A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City.
It's wild that it was a year
Today,
ago.
he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York. Second, we are not done. This investigation is ongoing.
That's
and I
important to
encourage
note.
anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly.
What's interesting about this is that I wonder if, now that he has been detained and now that he's been denied bail, and I don't think that will change at his hearing on Wednesday, if it will allow more victims and witnesses to feel that he can no longer reach them when he is in custody, and if it will encourage more to come forward and talk directly with the U.S. attorneys, or if it won't. But it's clear that the Southern District is hoping that him being in custody will help them bring in more victims and witnesses to these crimes.
Anyone with information can call 1-877-4-HSI-TIP. I want to express my deep appreciation for the victims and witnesses who have used their voices and helped bring this criminal conduct to light. We would not be here without them. I also want to thank the dedicated case agents on the HSI Trafficking in Person Squad in New York. They have been with us since day one and have worked tirelessly on this investigation.
Which is why this case is in New York.
They will continue to be invaluable partners to us. I also want to thank the incredible agents and analysts from SCNY who have also provided tremendous assistance on this case. I'm deeply grateful for their continued work. And finally, I want to thank the outstanding career prosecutors from SCNY who are handling this case. Meredith Foster, Emily Johnson, Chrissy Slavic, Madison Smizer, and Mitzi Steiner, and their supervisors, Jamie Backleeper and Jacqueline Kelly. They are members of the Civil Rights Unit in our criminal division. We created the Civil Rights Unit when I became U.S. Attorney. I'm deeply proud of their work on this and so many other cases. I'll now take some questions.
We'll go to one question from ABC.
Damian, thanks. The indictment describes aggressive, open, violent, hedonistic abuse that you say was recurrent and widely known. Why did it take law enforcement so long to intervene? How many women were victimized by Sean Combs, and how many others were involved?
Question.
Look, our investigation is ongoing. We are committed to bringing justice to everyone who's been victimized by the defendant. I can't tell you why it took so long. I think the better focus is on the fact that we are here today, and we are committed to making sure that justice is done.
And then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District goes on to take more questions from reporters, most questions that he cannot answer because this is an ongoing investigation, which he does highlight multiple times that this is an ongoing investigation. When we get to the detention hearing, it's interesting to note that Sean Combs did travel to New York in early September in hopes of being able to turn himself in. However, if he turns himself in, then the U.S. attorneys aren't going to be able to argue for detention. I think they very much wanted to keep Combs in custody, and with the trafficking charge that is the count 2 in this indictment, the presumption is no bail, and the defense has to rebut that presumption and show that bail should be granted. And I very much think that the U.S. attorneys in this case wanted to keep him in custody so that they had an easier time monitoring his calls. They talk about the fact that he was making calls to witnesses when things would happen in court and when civil lawsuits would drop. He would call others that might be victims of his behavior and remind them of the benefits that they have from him to, it seems, try to keep them on his side. And he did this over a variety of devices, not just his own, especially after the raids. He was concerned, they said in court, that his devices were being tapped, which they were. But he was concerned about that and then started using other devices to reach out to potential witnesses to the grand jury and victims. And that is something that the U.S. attorneys are incredibly worried about and want to make sure that they can monitor better. Yes, you can still make calls from custody. Yes, you can still try to get intermediaries to make those calls. But the feds made it clear that the phones are tapped and that there are more people in this investigation. So I wouldn't assume that those wiretaps end with Sean Combs. Let's take a look at what his defense attorney had to say after the detention hearing, and then we will talk about my experience in court today, the document of the indictment, and the detention hearing.
So this was the first step. We have a bail appeal scheduled for tomorrow at 3:30 in front of Judge Carter, the district judge assigned to this case. I think that we made the points that we've been wanting to make. I think it came out. Mr. Combs is a fighter. He's going to fight this to the end. He's in it.
With the charges in this indictment, I think repeatedly referring to your client as a fighter is maybe not the right plan. The indictment lists out quite a lot of violence. The video from March 2016 that was released in May 2024 by CNN from the Intercontinental Hotel is violent, to put it mildly. So repeatedly referring to Combs as a fighter is an odd choice for me. I think the defense could have gone a different direction with that, but maybe he's just telling us how he sees Sean Combs, and this was how he sees his client.
He's innocent. He came to New York to establish his innocence. He's not afraid.
Claims.
He's not afraid of the charges. There's nothing that the government said in their presentation today that changes anyone's mind.
He's not afraid of the charges. Again, the government talks about Sean Combs's control, his power, his influence, the way that he used his organization to silence and subdue his victims. It's an interesting thing to see the defense come in and say he's not afraid of any of this, and he's going to prove it all wrong.
About anything, he's been looking forward to this day. He's been looking forward to clearing his name.
He's been looking forward to being indicted on sex trafficking.
And we're going to stand by his side as he does. We believe in him wholeheartedly. He didn't do these things. This was a 10-year relationship. There's no coercion. There's no crime.
When he's saying this was a 10-year relationship, he is referring to who is referred to in the indictment as victim one, though this attorney made very clear during the detention hearing that victim one is Cassie. The things that are alleged in the indictment as to victim one line up very closely with her civil lawsuit. So I don't think that that is a surprise, especially with the way the government leaned into the importance of the video from the Intercontinental. The video from the Intercontinental is known to be between Sean Combs and Cassie. So it's odd to hear his defense attorney say he's denying these things. Some of what's discussed is on video. Some of what's alleged is on video. But this is very similar to what he argued in the detention hearing, that this was a 10-year relationship. And in his arguments, he states that there was no coercion here, that this was a consensual relationship. But I'll get more into that when we talk about the detention hearing.
There's basically just, someone who brought a civil case and now is finding themselves as a witness in a criminal case.
He's not really thinly veiling his arguments about Cassie. This is someone who brought a civil case and someone who now finds himself as a witness. Interesting that he didn't say victim, but as a witness in a criminal case. In the detention hearing, he did say there were 30 million reasons why, alleging that Cassie had asked for $30 million from Sean Combs before filing the civil lawsuit. So it's interesting to see that that is continuing to be his argument here. We'll see how that works going forward. We're going to hold on to this press conference, so at the end of the case, we can revisit this.
And we're going to fight this case with everything we have, as is he.
There's a lot of money.
Eventually, he's going to be shown to be innocent. And so tomorrow we fight again, and we'll fight every day until we don't have to fight anymore.
He's going to use that word a lot.
I don't know. The question is, why did it happen last night instead of today? I don't know the answer to that question.
Are you going to be
I just want to make one point very clear. We have no power. All we can do is show good faith. He got on a plane and he came here. And if he stayed here for 1 day before the case started, or for 1 year before the case started, he was going to stay as long as he needed to stay. It ends up being only 12 days. That's fine. That's what the government wanted to do. The government didn't want him to turn himself in. He came here to turn himself in.
Right.
Why doesn't the government want him to turn himself in? Because then they can't ask for detention.
Right.
So they go and they arrest him. They arrest a guy who came to New York to turn himself in.
Well,
But we're going to make all these points.
he said they arrested the guy who came to New York to turn himself in. Well, yeah. They're the feds. That's their prerogative. And you made it easier for them because he was in a hotel here in New York City. But they were going to go to where he was and arrest him. He talks more about this in the detention hearing, too. He talks about how terrifying the March 5th raids were for Sean Combs' children, that they were placed outside of the home in handcuffs in front of the media, and that they didn't want anything like that to happen again. So Sean was going to leave the homes and make sure that the feds could come get him where he was in a hotel in New York. However, when they do that, they also aren't searching your home again. If they're not coming to arrest you at their home, they're just searching your hotel room. So that might have been part of the conversation as well.
Again tomorrow, and we'll make it as much as we can until we get him out.
He's optimistic that the hearing on Wednesday afternoon will go differently. That hearing is in front of the district judge, not the magistrate judge that the arraignment was in front of today. But I think the result in this case on these charges is going to be the same. And that means we should talk about what these charges are. A huge thank you to today's sponsor, Thrive Causemetics. I talk about Thrive all the time, and it's because they make my beauty routine easy. And I don't travel without my brilliant eye brighteners. They are my easy go-to for all of my eye makeup looks. And right now I'm just traveling with two. I love Pilly and Aurora. They work really well for me. And you get that great little all eye bronzy. Emily, we haven't changed our makeup look since the 90s, and I'm here for it. Not only can you use the brilliant eye brighteners as a highlighter, you can use them as a shadow. They are incredibly versatile and come in matte shades and metallic shades, so you can pick the look that works best for you. I love keeping my makeup routine simple, and Thrive Causemetics helps me do just that. So maybe it's time to refresh your everyday look with Thrive Causemetics. It's the cosmetics that gives back. And yes, a part of every purchase goes to Thrive's giving causes. It's beauty you can feel good about. And right now you can get an exclusive 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/Lawnerd. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/Lawnerd for 20% off your first order. Let's get back to today's episode. Looking at the indictment released by the Department of Justice, this still says sealed indictment at the top. That has now been unsealed, obviously, when this was released to the public. United States of America versus Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Diddy, a.k.a. P. a.k.a. Love. When his defense attorneys appeared for him in court today at his presentment, they said Sean Love Combs. Also, no Puffy in the AKAs. Look, I'm a 90s girl, so I think Puffy first, Diddy second, but at this point, I think Diddy Do It and Diddy Detained, so that's changed a little bit. Those aren't AKAs. I was wondering how many AKAs there would be in this case, and well, we've got 5. Count 1 is the racketeering conspiracy, and in count 1, they list out the pattern of behavior. They say that the defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, he relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. I am not going to get into all of that now. Again, it very closely parallels Cassie's lawsuit, but it does talk about his corporate entities, saying that the entities include Bad Boys Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, Combs Global, and that those corporate enterprises are referred to as the Combs businesses throughout the indictment. We need to talk about the fact that all of these businesses are potentially part of the government's forfeiture. Not just his cars, his plane, and we heard a lot about his plane, his houses, but also Bad Boy Entertainment, and potentially a lot of what's tied up in Bad Boy Entertainment and others. Does Combs Enterprises deal with any of the clothing ventures, alcohol ventures, or other businesses? And it says that the corporate entities in the Combs businesses include record labels, a recording studio, an apparel line, an alcoholic spirits business, a marketing agency, and a television network and media company. All of those things may be subject to forfeiture. They say that the purpose of the Combs enterprise was to operate a global business in media, entertainment, and lifestyle industries, including, among other things, record labels, a recording studio and apparel line, an alcoholic spirits business, a marketing agency, and television network and media company, and that preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power, reputation, and brand of Sean Combs, and then AKA Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, PD, and Love, the defendant, a musician, entrepreneur, and figure in the entertainment industry. So they said that the purpose of the enterprise in all of those areas was to preserve, protect, promote, and enhance the power and reputation and brand of Sean Combs. And that is what they are using RICO for, so they can reach back to all of the pattern of behavior that they are alleging back to 2008, even if statute of limitations has lapsed on things, even if those things can't be charged as separate criminal charges, they come up if they are part of an enterprise to preserve, protect, promote, enhance the power, reputation, and brand. What's so interesting is that in the detention hearing, and I know I said I will talk about it later, but now it's just getting interspersed because that's how my brain works. The defense was talking about the video from the Intercontinental and that video was not Diddy trying to obstruct justice. It was not him trying to pull Cassie back into his hotel room. It was that they were having a fight because he had multiple girlfriends and that upset her, and that was him not obstructing justice, but that he was embarrassed because he couldn't have a video out there of him in a towel hitting his girlfriend. And so his reputation needed to be protected. But that's exactly what these RICO charges are. And I don't know if the defense attorney knew that he had stepped into exactly what the prosecution is arguing about RICO. He was saying this isn't obstruction of justice. It's just a bad look for him to have a video out there that is him violently attacking his girlfriend. So that's what the video is. It's not obstruction. It's not trying to keep Cassie from saying anything, but the government said the reason that video went missing off of servers from the hotel is because members of the enterprise paid those at the hotel to disappear the video. He actually said, the defense attorney actually said, I'm going directly to my notes on this, that the video shows that Combs had more than one girlfriend and got caught, that in that relationship there was mutual philandering, and that it was surprising to the defense that video ever saw the light of day. He said, quote, the video of Diddy got leaked. He didn't say Diddy. He said the defendant, he might have said my client, but that the video got leaked on a slow news day when Trump didn't have any court, and who knows how it got out. He was still arguing that it was odd that this video saw the light of day. And I was sitting on my hands to not say out loud in the overflow courtroom, right, it's weird that it got out because your client thought that somebody paid for it to disappear and never see the light of day again. That's why it's so strange that this video got out. But he talked about the video being embarrassing and damaging to Combs's reputation. And that's exactly what the government is saying with relation to the RICO enterprise. Let's go back to the indictment. The government goes on to say, quote, in the indictment, when Combs's authority or reputation was threatened by the possibility of negative publicity or legal or law enforcement action against him, including in or about late 2023, following the public allegations of Combs's crimes. Combs and members and associates of the enterprise pressured witnesses and victims, including through attempted bribery, to stay silent and not report what they had experienced or knew to law enforcement. On phone calls, Combs and other members and associates of the enterprise, among other things, provided these victims and witnesses with a false narrative of the events in efforts to conceal Combs's crimes. Combs caused these calls to be recorded on at least 2 occasions. Combs recorded them and then apparently kept them to the point that the government recovered them in their search warrants. Count 2 in this case is sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion for victim 1. And then they go and list out a number of the things here, including the allegations that this took place from 2009 to 2018, and that this impacted interstate commerce, again, giving the feds jurisdiction over this. And because it is trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, the penalties on this count are substantial. On count 2, the maximum is life in prison. The mandatory minimum sentence, if convicted, is 15 years. This is also the count that carries that presumption of detention, meaning a presumption that the defendant should not be released on bail when they are charged with this crime. And then count 3 is transportation to engage in prostitution from 2009 up till 2024, alleging that in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Combs transported individuals in foreign or interstate commerce with the intent to engage in prostitution, and then goes through the rest of that. That charge doesn't carry as much time as the trafficking, but it allows them to bring in other victims. They do mention here that this was an individual, so this might be a second charge to the same victim or an overlapping charge to the same victim. But again, there might be a superseding indictment here based on what was said in the press conference. Then we get to the forfeiture allegation. Look, federal forfeiture is no joke. The government will come take your shit. It's very interesting to see that Combs listed his Los Angeles home for sale for over $62 million. Will the feds try to have an eye on that sale so that the asset won't be liquidated before they can get their hands on it? Likely. There was also a note made during the detention hearing by the defense attorney that Sean Combs is trying to sell his plane, and it's hard to sell a plane. And who knew how difficult it was to sell a private jet? And the jet's in California, and we might have someone that's interested in buying the jet, but he's not going to have his private jet. It went on and on about the jet and the private jet and how hard it is to sell a private jet. But that's another asset that if people were being transported for the purposes of the freak-off parties, which is the basis of not just some of the trafficking claims, but also the basis of some of the RICO claims, then the plane is also subject to forfeiture. Like, this is a case where there's a lot of stuff to forfeit. And if the music was being used there, are we going to see the government potentially forfeiting royalties in music for Bad Boy Records? Are they going after Ciroc? I don't know. There are substantial assets here to be liquidated. I think at last estimation by Forbes, they estimate his net worth at about $400 million, which they say has fallen substantially from upwards of $740 million in 2019 due to these cases and due to stepping back from certain businesses he's in. But we're still looking at hundreds of millions of dollars. And when they're alleging everything is part of the RICO conspiracy, then it opens all these businesses up for potential forfeiture. And specifically, when they list out the forfeiture, they say any and all of the defendant's interest in securities of, claims against, and property or contractual rights of any kind affording a source or influence over the enterprise named and described herein, which is all the businesses, which the defendant established, operated, controlled, conducted, and participated in the conduct of. And then it lists out any property constituting and derived from proceeds obtained. So if you earn money from the business, and the business is the enterprise, and then you buy a house, then also the house. You buy a car, then also car, boat, plane, whatever. So everything. It's going to be everything that he has is what they're going to be looking for. And then they, of course, list the substitute assets provision. So if assets have been sold or transferred, they can go get it. You can't just transfer the title of your house into somebody else's name. They can still go after it. And that's the entirety of the indictment. I know one of the things that you're going to say is, Emily, what is he facing? So on count 1, the racketeering carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. Count 2 is the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. That carries that minimum prison sentence of 15 years. That means if you are convicted, 15 years is where you start, and a maximum of life in prison. And then the third count is a maximum of 10 years. So he's facing 2 life sentences with a minimum of 15 years. So really 15 years to life plus life. Let's talk about the detention hearing. I happen to be in New York for things I'm doing with YouTube, which I can't wait to share with you. But today, after I finished what I was doing this morning at Google headquarters, I took a look and saw that the arraignment was actually going to be this afternoon and not this morning, and went, I can do that. I can make it to federal court this afternoon. So changed as quickly as I could. Did I bring anything to wear to court? No. Did I bring pads of paper to go to federal court? No, because they take all your electronic devices, including your Apple Watch, your AirPods, your phone, whatever. But I grabbed the little pad next to the bed in my hotel of paper, had a pen, rolled into court. At one point, I was writing on paper towels because I ran out of paper, but it all worked. I distilled my notes into, a more formal process so I can tell you about it. But I'm going to talk through the detention hearing with you while we're going through the submissions made by the government and the defense. And then I'll intersperse in some of the quotes from court that I was able to get down verbatim with my chicken scratch shorthand. The U.S. attorneys had quite a lot of attorneys in court. Sean Combs came in to court with his hands behind his back, but not cuffed. He was just holding them back there and walking into court in gray sweatpants with a black stripe down the side and a black t-shirt. It seems that that's what he was arrested in last night, and then he was walked back into detention. I don't know if he will be in more of in custody clothes tomorrow and more of a jail jumpsuit now that bail has been denied and he will be going through that housing process, but I'm not sure. The reporters asked quite a lot, where is he being housed? The defense said that they did not know. I don't know if that will be known tomorrow. I think people are wondering if he's being held at Rikers. I think that's really what those questions were surrounding. Where is he going to be in custody? So there was much talk about that in the Q&A afterwards. I did not expect the detention hearing to last for over 2 hours. The arraignment started a little after 2:30, about 2:37. I was in the overflow courtroom, which is truly where I wanted to be, because the overflow courtroom has cameras that face the defendant at counsel table. And if they have cameras for an overflow room, why can't they just stream it? Because they don't want to. But it has cameras facing the attorneys and the defendant instead of sitting in court behind the defendant's head. So it was interesting to watch Sean Combs's face, the defendant's face, going through all of this, being able to see his body language when he was turning to sit facing his attorneys, when he was nodding along with things the prosecution was saying, when he was stoically looking at the judge and things like that. So it was nice to be in the overflow to see him, but in the overflow, I was mostly with young attorneys and court clerks who work for judges in the federal courthouse. So it just reminded me so much of not only working in Congress, but being in court when there would be celebrity days that all of the employees are like. But they all get to keep their phones and their devices because they work in the federal building. So I was able to ask people what time it was, which was helpful for me to know when we started. So started around 2:37, ran into a lovely law nerd who works in the building. So hello, it was lovely chatting. And it's a beautiful courthouse. It has an incredible view. No photography in the courthouse, but most federal courthouses are stunning buildings. This one is particularly lovely. Just a grand statue in the lobby. And then I was up on the 24th floor with a sweeping view up towards Manhattan of the Empire State Building and what have you. I thought it was kind of cool working at a courthouse where you could see the Hollywood sign. It's nothing on these views of New York. I gotta give it to the views from this courthouse. Stunning federal court building. But the audio was great, the video was clear, and it was nice to be able to see the defendant's face from the overflow room. The court explained the arraignment process. In the federal system, it's called presentment, but you're presented with the charges against you and arraigned on them. So he was given his rights. He stood up with a swiftness to say not guilty, and it was with force, not guilty, and quick. And that's the only time we heard from him during the entire hearing. He didn't seem surprised that he was being detained. I'm sure his attorneys explained to him that it is a presumption that you stay detained on these cases with the charge in count 2, and that the defense has to overcome that, and that that's unlikely, even with the bail package they put together. Also, they have the detention report, and the detention report also indicated that he should stay detained. So they knew this going into the hearing. After he was arraigned and he pled not guilty, we get into the detention hearing, and the government argued essentially what they put into their detention letter. The detention letter is filed September 17th. It is a 16-page document, and the government argues that on September 17th, an indictment was returned by a federal grand jury sitting in the Southern District of New York, was unsealed, charging the defendant with racketeering conspiracy from 2008 through the date of the indictment in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1962d, sex trafficking from in or about 2009 through in or about 2018, and interstate transportation to engage in prostitution in or about 2009 to 2024. And then it talks about his use of violence, threats, and coercion, and gets into the details similar to what was in the indictment, but with more details about the freak-offs using narcotics, for those using force, using fear, using power, using money. In one of the footnotes, it says, for example, in approximately 2012 in Manhattan, the defendant paid over $46,000 to cover damages to a penthouse hotel room following a freak-off. They also included the video from the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles as an exhibit here. They say that the victims believed they could not refuse the defendant's demands to engage in the freak-offs without risking their financial security or career prospects, or without repercussions in the form of physical or emotional violence. They then talk about other violence from Combs, and this goes to the arson. They say, for example, in the early morning hours of December 22, 2011, the defendant and a co-conspirator kidnapped an individual at gunpoint to facilitate breaking into and entering the residence of another individual. Multiple witnesses would testify at trial to the events surrounding the kidnapping and break-in, the later of which is corroborated by police reports and other records. Approximately 2 weeks later, the defendant's co-conspirator set fire to individual one's vehicle by slicing open the car's convertible top and dropping a Molotov cocktail inside the interior. Police and fire department reports extensively document the arson and conclude that the fire was intentionally set. Multiple witnesses would also testify to the defendant bragging about his role in destroying individual one's car. I had wondered when we saw the civil suit how this happened. I did not know it was a convertible, but that is how he blew up the car. And from the civil lawsuit from Cassie, we know that that was Kid Cudi's car, and we know that he bragged about it to numerous individuals. That's been alleged multiple times, and I imagine the individuals he bragged to about it have stated that to the prosecutors and the investigators in this case. They go on to talk about the firearms located in both his home in Miami and his home in Los Angeles. The defense argued that Sean Combs hires private security because the world is unsafe, and that those might belong to private security, even though in Miami the weapons were broken down and in the master bedroom closet, and armed security wouldn't necessarily have them broken down and in the master bedroom closet and have the serial numbers scratched off and obscured. And when rebutting that, the prosecution said that for armed security to have these weapons like this is absurd. The prosecution spent quite a lot of time talking about obstruction of justice and bribing witnesses, not just in their letter, but also in their oral arguments to the court, saying that one of their concerns with Combs being out of custody is not just danger to the victim and witnesses and danger to the community, but also the fact that he has persistently and repeatedly called victims, called witnesses, attempted to bribe individuals to cover things up, and that this has been perpetrated across decades and covered up. The prosecution said in their opening to the court, quote, "The defendant physically and sexually abused victims for decades using his vast resources to perpetrate and cover up his actions. He is a serial abuser and a serial obstructor. He is an extreme danger and presents a serious risk of obstruction and flight." They also said to the court, you cannot believe him. He lies to cover things up. When arguing about the video that was released this year that was taken in March of 2016 at the Intercontinental between Diddy and Cassie, the prosecution says in their letter to the court, and argued it to the court as well, that the defendant was captured on video surveillance, striking, kicking, and dragging a woman in the public area of a hotel in an apparent attempt to prevent her from leaving a freak-off. When a member of hotel security staff intervened, the defendant attempted to offer the hotel security officer a stack of cash to ensure his silence. After the security guard refused the defendant's bribe, and after coordination between the defendant and his employees, the defendant's staff contacted other members of hotel security. At the same time, staff members were in close communication with the victim of the assault as well, all in an effort to cover up the defendant's assault and to prevent the incident from being publicly disclosed. Within days of the incident, the surveillance video disappeared from the hotel server. And they went on to say that the government's investigation is ongoing, and because it is ongoing, if the defendant was allowed out of custody, he would have more opportunity and ability to contact victims and witnesses and potentially obstruct justice. They go on to say in their detention letter that more recently the defendant has directly and through intermediaries engaged in obstructive conduct related to matters under investigation in this case. Specifically, following the November 2023 lawsuit, that's Cassie's lawsuit, the defendant and intermediaries acting on his behalf reached out to potential victims and witnesses of the alleged conduct, including individuals he did not speak to regularly and had not spoken to in years, in an attempt to feed those victims and witnesses false narratives about the defendant's criminal conduct. With respect to at least two of those individuals, the defendant's co-conspirators assisted in efforts to protect the defendant. For example, on or about November 19th, 2023, just 3 days after the filing of the lawsuit described above, the defendant made multiple calls to another victim of his sexual abuse and recorded certain of the calls using the cell phone of a co-conspirator. During the calls, the defendant repeatedly asked for the victim's support and, quote, friendship, and attempted to convince the victim that she had willingly engaged in acts constituting sexual abuse. This also ties into what the defense argues in their part of the detention motion, saying that these were all consensual encounters and that the government is not saying they weren't consensual. And the response to that was, no, the government is saying that they were at the hands of violence and coercion. So they didn't say non-consensual, they said forced, which also includes non-consensual. Going on to the detention letter, the defendant also assured the victim on those recorded calls that if she needed the defendant to, she ain't got to worry about nothing else. A thinly veiled attempt to coerce the victim into adopting and supporting the defendant's false version of events to protect the defendant. Even more concerning, since learning about the criminal investigation, including following the execution of search warrants at his residences, Combs contacted other witnesses on multiple occasions, including other witnesses who had received grand jury subpoenas. He started calling everybody. They talk about the fact that the defendant is a risk of flight. They talk about the fact that he has over $1 million in cash in hand when he travels, that at one point his net worth was estimated to be over $1 billion, that he had 2 primary residences and a private plane. He has the wealth to flee and to disappear. They also argue that the bail package submitted by the defense is insufficient to not only stop the defendant from leaving the jurisdiction and guaranteeing that he'll return to court, but also guaranteeing that he will stop engaging in potential intimidating behavior. They say defense counsel has proposed certain bail conditions, including home detention with electronic monitoring and a $50 million bond secured by the defendant's Miami property. They say these conditions are plainly insufficient to address the legitimate concerns set out above. In particular, given the defendant's history of engaging in obstructive conduct, the court must reject the insufficient conditions. Thank you to today's sponsor, Shopify. Not only does Shopify run the Law Nerd Shop and so many other shops that you love across the internet, but they make it easy to sell whether you are online or in person or a combination of both. So if you have been thinking about selling for the holidays or you want to see what it might look like to start up your own shop, Shopify's $1 per month free trial might be a great fit for you. Not only do they have a ton of templates that you can customize for yourself, but they have award-winning customer service that will help you if you get stuck in getting your shop up and running. Not only has Shopify allowed me to start when I didn't have the money to invest in the Law Nerd shop, but it has grown with me and made it easy, not just to ship in the US, but to take care of Law Nerds all across the world. If you are ready to upgrade your experience, it's time to get the same checkout we have with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month free trial period at shopify.com/lawnerd. Remember, that's all lowercase. That's shopify.com/lawnerd, and you'll be hearing this sound soon. Let's get back to today's episode. You also saw the government in their detention hearing talking about the fact that Sean Combs was sued in September 2024 by Don Richards, and then talked about the fact that Combs got on the phone with another bandmate of Don Richards who had been in Danity Kane, Kalena Harper, and had extensive phone contact with her. And she also put out statements saying that what was in Don Richards' lawsuit was not her experience, but that Combs had over 58 calls and texts over the 3 days following Don Richards' lawsuit being filed. So they talk about this pattern of Combs engaging with potential victims and witnesses when things are happening in court, around the time of Cassie's lawsuit, around the time of other instances in court, around the time of the March raids on his home, and around the time of the September 10th, 2024 lawsuit. The government also laid out some of the strength of their evidence in this case because it's one of the factors the court can consider. They said that there were over 50 witnesses who were first parties to abuse and injuries of the victims. And if there are 50 firsthand witnesses to abuse, my question is, why aren't there more indictments? The government also said that they have over 90 cell phones, cloud accounts, and computers, over 30 other digital devices, including security systems, hard drives, thumb drives, and that the grand jury sent out more than 300 subpoenas for documents. This is a grand jury that has been convened since the summer and was a very active investigative grand jury. They sent out 300 subpoenas. The government also argued that this case is similar to Jeffrey Epstein, R. Kelly, and Keith Raniere. They talked about all of those cases and the RICO charges, and that all of those defendants were detained before trial. The defense also talked about all three of those cases one at a time and said Jeffrey Epstein, children; R. Kelly, children; Keith Raniere, children. And then the defense said children cannot consent, and started arguing that in the relationship between Diddy and Cassie, the freak-offs were consensual encounters. I'm just telling you what the defense is arguing, that the freak-offs were consensual encounters, and that as part of their 10-year relationship, they liked to bring third parties into their relationships. Now, that is nothing like what Cassie's civil lawsuit says, and nothing like what is said in these lawsuits, but the defense was trying to argue that the detention in those cases with Epstein and R. Kelly and Raniere, the victims were children. And in these cases, these were adults engaging in bringing third parties consensually into their relationships. The government also argued that even when Diddy was detained, when his hotel room searched, there was pink powder, which we've heard about in the civil lawsuits, in his hotel room, and that is being tested for narcotics. And they argued that he has a substantial issue with narcotic abuse. The defense arguments asked the court to trust not just Sean Combs, but also the defense attorney, that Sean Combs has done everything in his power to build trust with the government and to build trust with the court, which is probably why you heard the government in their argument say early on that you can't believe Sean Combs because he lies to cover things up. But the defense was very clear, saying you should trust him. He came from New York to Miami knowing that an indictment was close. He didn't flee. They said that the defense attorneys got involved in this case in March 2024 and that the defendant has done what they asked him to do to prove he can be trusted. He gave over his passports, the passports of family members and children. He tried to sell the plane. He paid off his Miami home to use it as collateral because everyone can just pay off a $50 million home. That he listed his home in California for sale for over $60 million. And they said this was not a surprise to the defendant, that he knew that this was the direction this was headed after those March raids. The defense said, quote, "This isn't a show. We took this seriously from the earliest stages to try to earn the trust of the government." And again, when somebody's being accused of using their power, money, and wealth to manipulate individuals, as the defense was making these arguments, I was sitting in court wondering if the court thought that any of this also proved the point of the government, which is he is using money and those around him to try to get what he wants, which is to not be in custody. So again, as the defense is arguing, there's a part of me sitting there listening going, but doesn't that prove the other point too? The defense talked about how scary the raids were in March for Diddy and his family, and that he didn't want that to happen again, so he came to New York to wait. The defense's argument there was Diddy was thinking, you want me, I know you want me, so here I am. And they indicated how frustrated they were that he was not allowed to turn himself in. He went on about the plane at this point, and that they've been trying to sell the plane for 4 to 5 months. It's really hard to sell the planes. There's lots of issues with selling a plane, and it's a weird process to sell the plane, and there's all these different types of banks involved in selling a plane. And I was sitting in court being like, how much are we going to talk about the plane? On and on and on. And then he started talking about victim one. And you are probably going to have the same moments that I did listening to these arguments. I am retelling you what the defense argued in court. He reiterated this outside of court, and this is what is going to continue to come up from the defense team. So me leaving it out because the arguments are distasteful, I don't think helps give you an accurate presentation of what is being argued in court in this case and what victims in cases like this face in court and with the arguments the defense will make, because the defense previewed the arguments they're going to make. And what the defense said was that when victim one filed the lawsuit, there was a flurry of civil cases and people were jumping on the bandwagon. And they saw that he wrote a very large check and then everyone lined up to get their checks. That is a direct quote. He also then said, quote, "Mr. Combs is not a perfect person. There's been drug use and a toxic relationship where they were mutually toxic." He goes on to say that the government was arguing the video from the Intercontinental is obstruction of justice, and he said it wasn't obstruction of justice. He said when this goes to trial, what will be shown about the video from the Intercontinental is that victim one had issues with Diddy because she had found out that he had more than one girlfriend, and she was upset, and she was looking through his phone and then hit him in the head with his cell phone while he was asleep, grabbed all of his clothes and ran out of the hotel room, leaving him in the hotel room with no clothes. This is exactly what the defense was arguing in court. They then said that the video from the Intercontinental shows that Combs had more than one girlfriend and got caught. That was their argument in court. He then said that there was mutual philandering in the relationship, also a direct quote. And that then victim one got married to the trainer that Diddy hired for her and had children. And then years later, she wrote a book. This is all the defense's argument in court today. Years later, she wrote a book. And after she wrote the book, he said to the court, she had her lawyer call Diddy's lawyer and say, she wrote a book, she's going to release the book. But if you want to buy the rights for the book for $30 million, then you will control the release of the book. And this is the narrative the defense is going to continue with, because later on in their arguments, they said there were 30 million reasons why this victim would be working with the government. They also said that even though Sean Combs settled the lawsuit with Cassie for a undisclosed but large sum. It was because of the embarrassment of the leaked video and that he can't afford to be, quote, seen in a towel hitting his girlfriend. It's embarrassing to him, but it's not obstruction of justice. And he argued again that she wrote a book instead of going to the police, and then went down the line of argument that the government never said there wasn't consent here. The government looked at this point like they were ready to leap out of their seat and say, you must have forgotten that we charged sex trafficking by force when you are sitting here arguing that no one said that there wasn't consent. Sir, I was there. I was struggling to not yell back at the attorney. And I'm like, I am in real court. I am sitting in real court. So I am going to I'm going to listen to what the man says, because this is what is going to be argued when this case goes to trial. This is the defense lining out what's going to happen when they go to trial. I think the benefit to the government here is they now know verbatim what the defense is going to say when this goes to trial and when the victim is in court, and can show her a transcript and say, this is the direction they're going, and you have a heads up of what this is going to be, and can prepare for that. But I don't think in 2024 these arguments are going to be well taken by a jury. They definitely weren't taken well by many that were sitting in the overflow room watching this play out. He wrapped up his argument saying that you can trust Sean Combs based on his action, that the $50 million bond secured by a $48 million mansion in Miami is sufficient, and asked the court not to just trust Combs, but to trust the defense attorney. He said, Your Honor, trust him, but also trust me to make sure that he's coming back to court, to make sure that he's doing what you ask him to do. And then he told the court that his client had become a punching bag for civil lawsuits, and that's part of why we're here for this case. The government got up and said, Your Honor, the presumption here is detention, and the defense has not rebutted that presumption, and we're talking about trafficking by force. So if I was not clear enough, no one is saying, other than the defense, that there was any consent for the freak-offs parties and for what happened here. And surely the action and the videotaping and the leveraging and the digital evidence also belies that point. And the defense again got up to say, but Your Honor, this was a mutual relationship. It was mutually toxic. You can trust the defendant and you can trust me. The court took a break, reviewed the report, and came back and said that the defendant would be detained, would not be granted bail, and talked about Sean Combs's substance abuse, the abuse alleged in this case, the violence alleged in this case, and said to Sean Combs, I don't know if you can trust yourself. The court said that the danger of violence is significant, that there is evidence of coercion, and even the evidence of gentle coercion is significant, because persuasive coercion, hey, I'm going to keep paying for your house. It's not violence, but it's not less coercive. The court said thank you to the defendant's friends and family who showed up, who are willing to sign bonds, who were willing to support him, and then reiterated there is nothing that will reasonably assure his return to court or will deter potential witness intimidation or interaction or obstruction. And that was the end of the hearing. He was taken back into custody. And then I left court to get my devices to tell all of you, and to go see the media pool, and to see the defense attorney give his statement outside of court that we watched earlier. And they will be back in court tomorrow. I don't think the result will change. The presumption here is difficult for the defense to rebut, and the rebuttal being But, Your Honor, it's not witness intimidation, or they were in a relationship, and these behaviors that are graphically lined out in this indictment are consensual is a wild argument to make. Of course, at the end of all of this, these are allegations. The defendant remains innocent in the eyes of the law until proven guilty. This is a case where the maximum sentence and even the mandatory minimum are so high that I don't see any other way forward for this case but trial. It will be tried in the Southern District of New York, and true to federal cases, there will not be TV or cameras, but there will be tons of media coverage of this case. I hope you enjoyed my coverage of this case from the road today. And a huge thank you to Team Baker for making this happen and getting this podcast out, even when it was recorded very late. So a huge thank you to the team for making sure this happened. My gratitude, and I know the Law Nerds' gratitude as well. So say it with me. May your hotel Wi-Fi be strong. May your toilet paper be plentiful. May your family be well, and may the odds be ever in your favor, and may you not leave your new favorite water bottle in the back of an Uber. But that's a problem for me to deal with tomorrow. So, Law Nerds, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a Law Nerd. Stay tuned to the Law Nerd app. That's where I put all of the breaking information and where I'm keeping you updated on my travels around New York with Google and some YouTubers that I'm very excited to see in the coming days. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. You can stay up to date with everything I'm covering on our free iOS and Android app at lawnerdapp.com, or search your app store for Law Nerd. And you can also follow me on social media at the Emily D. Baker. Remember, I stream on YouTube on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I recap all of that for you in quick bits on Monday. And of course, the Emily Show drops on Wednesdays. Thanks for being a Law Nerd.